Good afternoon. This is Saturday. That's me last night at P.F. Chang's in Boston, restaurant in Arlington, Virginia. And today, well, I wanted to talk about Social Security a little bit, but I'll just share a couple of other pictures. Um, I checked my statement. It says I'm supposed to get the next payment on March the 12th. And that's a friend at a brunch today categorizing a Trump sandwich. I think that was kind of funny, given what's going on, and I'll talk about it a little bit. And then that was the breakfast, not Waffle House, but Freddy's in Arlington, Virginia. Um, but let me just talk a little bit about all the furor over Social Security. First of all, there's supposedly they cut a lot of positions and people are worried about whether they're going to get their payments and so forth. I don't see any evidence that anything in their automated systems is at risk. But I'm watching it carefully. But I'm supposed to get the next payment on March the 12th. I got one February 12th, and Trump was in office. And the payments on March the 3rd went through okay. There were some special payments. So I don't think there's a problem. But Musk and the DOGE and everything have been making a lot of furor over whether Social Security has been paying payments to dead people, and they say there's a numerical algorithm having to do with dates and so forth. Kind of reminds you of the Y2K problem. That no, they actually can detect it, and no, that's not really true. But I do remember this when my own mother died, December 14th on 2010. I was still in the house, and we had the burial service on the 21st and so forth. I do remember writing a letter, printing it on the computer to Social Security and mailing it with a postage stamp, advising them of her Social Security number and of her passing. And made one more payment to her account, and then they took the payment back out with an automatic withdrawal. So they can actually withdraw from an account that they can deposit in. And so in early January, they did that of 2011. So I know in my own situation, we took care of it. But it does raise a good question. I'm alone, I live alone. I'm 81. I don't have close relationships with any relatives. Most of them have passed away, and I don't really have anybody that looks after me or anything. If something happened to me, how would the Social Security know? Eventually the lawyers would get around to filing an IRS return, and eventually the IRS would probably notify them of all this. It would take months probably, but that's a good question. And it also raises a bigger question about someone like me that has a lot of agency right now. And I'm going to talk about my future projects in the next few years, in the time that I might have left. We talked about my expectancy in the previous post, but it's taken at the cemetery. But we'll talk about what my plans are for the next few years soon. But yeah, I mean, in Virginia, anyone can ask a court to look at whether somebody can take care of themselves, and you can be put under conservatorship or guardianship. And I have a problem with keeping the apartment clean or the condo clean. There's so much clutter from when I moved in from the house, and it got much worse during the pandemic because we couldn't tend to certain things very easily. Never really quite got out from under that. But I've had powers of attorney, and I have a trust that became a grantor trust. I checked into, as I said, indicated last time, I checked into whether a grantor trust in itself would require me to file a beneficial owner statement. It seems like it does not, as long as it doesn't contain any LLCs or companies or limited partnerships or anything like that. Anything I would have to file with the Secretary of State of Virginia would mean that I would have to file with the federal government a beneficial owner's statement. Now, a beneficial owner of a company or like an LLC or something is somebody that's not necessarily on the title but has control of something, and stands to gain from their association with the company and the way they work with the company. It sounds like Elon, doesn't it? But yeah, that's a beneficial owner. And whereas a beneficiary of a trust is someone who will get the proceeds when you die, so it's kind of morbid. But some of it, sometimes they have some rights to get some. You may have set up a distribution, a regular distribution to them, or if any of the beneficiaries have minor children themselves, sometimes they have a right to make a very small claim for medical or educational expenses of their own children. That is, or for themselves. That is something that's actually in my trust. It's never been used, but it's possible that can happen. Now, there is a committee of beneficiaries that theoretically owns this condo I'm in. I actually, in a sense, pay it rent with an automated mechanism, and it's way below market, believe me. And theoretically, they could organize to discipline me if they didn't like something. And I am concerned about one of them, and I am concerned about one of the particular political issues I'll mention at the end of this video. But the best way I can think of that, let's say Social Security could make sure that somebody like me that doesn't have anybody supervising him actually is still alive is to require me to log on to the site once a month, which I just showed you. I did in the illustrations before the payment's supposed to be made out. That would be one way to do it, but of course that presumes you have a computer or a phone and have the skill to log on if you're alone. If something happened to you when you were lying unfound in a condo for many weeks or in a home, like that recent case in New Mexico, it just could, there's no guarantee that something like that couldn't happen for a while. But that could be something you could require is for people to log on. And of course, logging on to the IRS has been made a little more complicated recently. They've changed the logon procedure. You can still do ID/ME if you want, but they'll probably phase that out. And it's a little more complicated to do than it should be sometimes. So that was the idea, though, that I was going to share, that if you are alone by yourself and have control of your own life, but fear somebody could try to take it away from you, if they filed a complaint with the state or thought you weren't competent, you could imagine having a requirement where you've got to log on to the site. But otherwise, you kind of have to have a buddy looking after you, like to accompany you from hospitals or something. I just wanted to go over this thing. The last video I talked about things that could be labels, date of birth, and biological sex. And then there are other ways you could characterize what the person actually does. Now, legal identifiers that are like on your driver's license with the state or passport, they should be immutable and they should be things you can prove. What you declare yourself to be based on your feelings is not something that should be used to identify you legally. And so, I've talked to them before about Paul Rosenfels' book, The Homosexuality, the Psychology of the Creative Process, or book from the early 70s in the Ninth Street Center. And his ideas about polarities and modes, the idea that you have, 4 temperaments, objective and subjective versus masculine and feminine polarities. Yeah, those are personality traits, but they shouldn't be used as gender identities. They shouldn't be used to classify you legally according to civil rights laws. because they're too subjective. It's just how you report yourself. And likewise, Judith Butler's performativities. The performativity in Judith Butler's world is essentially the same thing as a polarity combined with a mode of operating. So these examples, so gender identity, because it's been legally based on self-reporting, even for minors, it's really circular. And sexual orientation, if it's simply a self-report, that's also circular. And if you did, imagine if you allowed sexual orientation to be part of an identifier. If you said, a gay male is going to have a special place in society because they're not going to have children, which isn't always true. And so they'll be an extra caregiver, or they'll be an extra warrior or something for the tribe, which is what some tribal societies have done. I don't think you want that. And you could imagine the same thing being done. Well, with gender identity, essentially, some of these indigenous peoples do that. I think that would mean less freedom and regressiveness, not more freedom. I think it would mean less freedom. So it could be very easily abused by an authoritarian state, and has been in the past. So it's better to pass civil rights laws and use due process as well as equal protection. And I know Justice Alito doesn't like depending on due process based on that 22 opinion, with Roe versus Wade and everything. But I think it's better to say people should be protected from discrimination in housing and in employment and access to financial services and so forth based on perceived behaviors, if they're personal in nature, or like with gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation or something, rather than just simply giving them a legal label. I think it's much better to just simply use more a due process idea than an equal protection idea. And I think the Supreme Court actually in 2022 is a little bit off base in downgrading the importance of due process. I think due process is very important, personally. And I think I'm a conservative, but I wouldn't be doing all the things I'm seeing going on right now with the Trump administration. I do applaud the court for saying that Trump has to pay some things that Congress appropriate. I think it has to do with USAID. I hope he does it. That a couple of the justices came around and agreed with following the law and not following just an ideology. And so I'm glad to see Roberts and Barrett came along and ruled according to the law personally. But that's what I had today. The importance of somebody that's in my situation. What do they do if what happens if if something happens to me and we don't find out about it and just try to keep on getting benefits or something? And could I wind up having to be put under more supervision? Yeah, and I think that's potentially a serious problem. So I wanted to talk about it. So that is what I have for today, Saturday. And I do thank you for listening.